It's so cool to be here and to be sharing the stage with these people. And I'm really thrilled to be here. So I'm a journalist, and for about 7 years I've been writing about debt, among many other issues. But my first book was about debt. It was called Generation Debt. And in 2007, I read a really interesting essay in Harper's, which was basically making the case that all money is debt, and that debt is intricately connected with slavery and violence and a lot of other kind of scary things. And I contacted the author, whose name is David Graeber, and we kept in touch over the next few years. And he was just then starting to work on a book that came out a couple of months ago called Debt, A 5,000-Year History. And so in August, he and I sat down to talk about this book for a piece that was subsequently killed by my magazine because it was too complicated and too radical. But about 4 weeks later, Graeber was at the meeting that became the catalyst for the whole Occupy Wall Street movement, and he's one of the big intellectual leading minds behind the whole movement. So I thought it would be interesting to talk to you guys about what I would have talked about in my column that got killed, which is the 5,000-year history of Occupy Wall Street. And I'm going to do it in 7 to 12 minutes. So basically, here's the deal. Where does money come from? The story that we tell is often about barter. It's a very simplified story of, we have economies, like the fisher people meet up with the farmer people and they trade things. But, Graeber thinks this is really totally oversimplified and wrong. He did his fieldwork in Madagascar, and his idea is that barter is not something that is a tit-for-tat exchange. It's a very uncommon thing. What you normally have is you have a web of relationships, and if you think about in your informal life, your non-economic life, you have a web of relationships. Someone gives you something, do you automatically reach in your pocket, like your mother or your friend, makes you dinner? Do you reach in your pocket and say, oh, how much was this? I want to give you some money. No, that would not be a good step to take, in a friendship. So what you do is you have a much more loose system of accounting, and you want to keep the circulation going. It's like I give you something, you give me back something else, I give you something else at the next party or the next festival, and this is like a potlatch. People have talked about that. So that's really more like what it was like in a very, a more simple kind of economic system. But there was an exception. There were times when you wanted a very abstract and a very formal reckoning of what people owed to each other. And those times had to do with when you were pissed off, right? So if someone kills your brother, you are going to demand exactly 12 cows in repayment for that exchange. If, Hammurabi's Code, which is 1987 BC or something, he says an eye for an eye, but really it's this much gold for an eye, because you don't want to start a blood feud and actually take someone else's eye out. You want to repay it to a certain amount. So they became this abstract system of reckoning and these various mediums of exchange. Sometimes they were things that were intrinsically valuable, like everything we reckoned in cows. In ancient Ireland, they actually used slave girls as a means of reckoning. And in other places, they involved kind of symbolic things that did not have intrinsic value, but they were still used in the same kind of way. Cowrie shells in West Africa and wampum, also shell beads in Native America. So, and basically, Graeber calls these human economies because the money is used basically to rearrange relationships between people, and not just in cases of violence, but also in cases of, like, say, someone's going to leave your tribe and go marry someone else. So money, but the basic principle to keep in mind is money is representing a special kind of human relationship, but there's also like this tinge of blood to the whole thing, which is kind of unsettling. So what happens next? Things get more complicated. We've got the rise of empires. Empires raise armies, so they do violence on a whole different scale. They also do money on a whole different scale because they need to trade beyond the boundaries of normal webs of human social relationships. They're going much farther. So they need to have currencies and they need to have markets. And there is this intrinsic relationship that keeps cropping up again and again between the money that the empires use and violence and slavery. So in one case, for example, a conquering army will come to a new place and they'll enslave a bunch of people and they'll take them back and they'll say you have to work off a certain number of years, or it'll be reckoned in a certain number of pounds of salt or something else. Your freedom's been taken away and a debt has replaced it, and now you have to pay it off. Another way of doing it is in ancient Rome, they would say we're going to issue a certain coin we're going to give that coin to the soldiers as their salary, and then we're going to tax the people in the form of that coin. So what does that mean? It means the people in the armies in the countries where the Roman army is going, they have to do things for the soldiers to get the coin so that they can pay that coin as a tax, right? So it's kind of a neat shell game. So now there's attempts to tie money to a commodity with intrinsic value because it has scarcity, like a gold or a silver, but it always kind of comes away from that, because what the value of the currency goes down to is the strength of the empire. Stronger the empire, the stronger the currency. And this becomes a self-fulfilling kind of cycle, because as the empire gets stronger, the currency gets stronger. And when you have a really strong currency, people want to make trades with it even if they're not trading with that empire, right? So everybody says, like, they got to get their hands on that American greenback or that Roman silver. And to do that, they have to give the empire what it wants. So the empire gets stronger and stronger. But there's this temptation on the part of the empire to kind of push that advantage a little bit too much by debasing the currency, printing more and more of it, right? So that they can go and do more campaigns and overextend their military. And then there starts to be, because of everybody wanting the currency, there starts to be a finance industry, which is the industry of traders who speculate on top of the currency. Then inflation gets higher and higher, and you kind of see where we're going with this, right? By the way, there's another aspect to this kind of debt financed or credit bubble world, which is, how do you keep the people happy while this is going on? A good way of doing it is extending credit to them, so allowing them to borrow to get what they need. So, inflation happens, the military gets overextended, wealth concentrates in the hands of a few speculators, more and more of the people are plunged into debt peonage, which comes from the overextension of credit. Debt crisis. This happened in Rome in the 1st centuries AD, happened in ancient Babylon, it happened in Europe at the beginning of the Dark Ages, happened in India under Ashoka, and in China during the Han Dynasty. And it's happening right now, right? So in 1971, Nixon went off the gold standard, basically creating this credit-based currency. And the debt crises followed not too long after that. First, they happened in Latin America and Asia. We lent these developing economies a lot of money. We called it investment. The World Bank, lent all these countries a lot of money, and they had debt crises and their economies collapsed. Who knew? Then we brought it back home to America, and as well in Europe. So we have this debt crisis going on in America. Now, here's where we're in trouble. So the income of the average American, tracking very closely with the inflation of this debt bubble, the income of the average American has been stagnant or steady since the 1970s. But obviously the cost of many things has grown. So for a long time, people made up the difference by borrowing money. We borrowed $14 trillion for mortgages, $1.5 trillion for credit cards, $1 trillion for student loans. So the cost of basic things that people, oh, and by the way, there's no major category of debt for healthcare, which is interesting because medical care is also the greatest cause of bankruptcy in America. So people kept borrowing money. The easy credit was the way of kind of keeping people quiet even as this inequality grew and grew. But obviously this has a problem because in 2007 household debt peaked at 230% of our disposable income. People owed twice plus a third again of how much they had to spend over the poverty line. And then we had a crash. So we had this crash. What happens in a debt crisis? How do people respond to a debt crisis? The guys that run the economy do what they have to do, which is they write off everybody's loans so the economy can keep going, right? But in previous debt crises, there's a very big difference between what happened in this debt crisis and in previous debt crises, which is when they got to this point in previous debt crises in Babylon, in Rome, in India, in China, they wrote off everybody's debt. They had, it was called in the Bible a jubilee or a general amnesty. A lot of times there'd be a regime change and they would say all the slaves are free, all the debt is gone, there's a new guy in charge, hallelujah, everything's gonna be great now. What did we do this time? Well, we bought off or bailed out and paid off the largest debtors in the economy, the people who had been trading and making all the money. We didn't do anything for everybody else. So with the result, predictable result, that average American now, 1 out of 3 Americans who owns a home, it says on their loan that they owe more than the house actually is worth. So they're underwater. Economy can't really keep going again because people can't spend because they still have all this debt hangover from this popped bubble. And even though the the absurdity of the regime has been exposed, and there was this moment, and David and I talked about it when we had coffee in August, that people realized, the veil had been pulled away, and everybody knows that nobody knows anything, and the guys that are smart are supposed to be in charge of it don't know anything. And then we kind of said, okay, forget about it. Let's forget about that. Let's pull the curtain back and just try to keep going. Like, it never happened, right? And that's why people are really, really mad. We didn't have a regime change. We didn't have a jubilee, right? And David, as I mentioned, is an anarchist, as well as an esteemed anthropologist. And he has a very particular approach to getting mad. He's not so interested in having a protest movement. He wanted to, and the framework for this was laid, first of all, in Europe. So Europe, as you recall, is currently in the throes of the same debt crisis that we've been having over here. And they've been having a popular movement because they have a lot more robust kind of energy left. Is that the 11? Okay. I've got one more minute. So they have this General Assembly movement, which is basically you don't just protest what's going on, but you also try to create the alternative in the way that you're acting. And David's definition of anarchism is people acting as though they're free. And I want to talk about what that means from the point of view of student debt, because that's my most embraced topic. There's two ways of talking about how to act about student debt. One is you can say we can vote and protest and push to abolish it and to have bankruptcy protection. All this stuff is really good. Part two, or the alternative way of doing it, is we can educate ourselves for free, person to person, and not have to deal with the universities and the fact that they charge hundreds of thousands of dollars. So you can protest, you can push against things, or you can create your own thing. And both of those things are happening at Occupy Wall Street. And I think we all have the ability to do both of those things in our own lives as well, because the third kind of phase beyond this, there's this human economy, kind of primitive human economy, then there's this capitalist boom and bust economy. I think there's a chance to think about how to enter a third phase, which is combining elements of both. We all do things that are human. We all do things that are in the marketplace. If we can remember that the foundation of the economy is human relationships, and that's the only reason we have an economy is to provide for human needs, then we never say it's not personal, it's business. We always say everything's personal and everything is human, and I have to act like a human being all the time.
Thank you very much.